Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Well, welcome to another episode of Relationships Inside Out. Today, we're going to talk about enmeshment or family enmeshment.
Enmeshment, the way we talk about it is this extreme closeness between family members, relational partners, parent-child, but it is closeness that is beyond just, I like my family member, but I depend on them. I can't function or think without them.
Yeah, if we break up the family from more of a structural sense, like subsystems, right? There's the spousal subsystem, which are make up the parents. There's a sibling subsystem, and diffuse boundaries between these subsystems, right? There's not a clear boundary. They're managing each other's emotions, and there's reciprocity and kind of managing conflict and learning about each other's drama. There's really not like a hierarchical nature in this.
When we talk about diffuse boundaries, I want to define that. Diffuse means like permeable. If you think of like a wall, it'd be a wall with a lot of holes in it. It doesn't take much to get through, right?
Yeah.
Ideally, our boundaries have a little bit of flex to them, but they're not permeable. We get to make them independently. We get to choose. Then the other extreme is my boundaries are so rigid and firm that there is no flex, there is no give. It just is what it is.
As we talk about this, it's important to not look at this as diagnostic, more of just a reflection of, I wonder if that's an issue for me. I wonder if there's something I should do about that. Because there are consequences to this, which we'll get into. But again, don't look at this as, we're enmeshed, this is bad, and something's wrong with you or something.
It depends on culture, faith, family structure, right? One family may think being super close or even hugging is too far. Another family, everyone pitches in to pay all the bills and we all live together. Neither of those are inherently bad. It is how does it impact the members of the system in the long term and the short term that we care about.
Yeah, and I think we could judge it and just say that's not right based on our own cultural standard, but it's really the outcomes.
Yeah.
Right. It's really, well, what's happening? Oh, okay. These people are suffering and this is a product of it. And they do see some differences across cultures. Like, for example, in the UK, they have greater rates of depression compared to Italy because of their understanding and cultural factors of systems and how the family functions. So there is some subjectiveness to this and what it means. So in the UK or even the United States, being enmeshed does not bode well for the children. Well, probably even the parents too.
Sure. And are we in an individualistic society where it's about serving the individual and that's how we create happiness? Or are we more in like a community-based society where it's about serving the greater good? And the beliefs around that, right?
Yeah.
If my beliefs are one way and then I'm being put into a box of another, that dissonance can be jarring. That can create issues. If my belief is that we are in a community-based society and that's being lived out, that might feel authentic and good to me. Same with the individualistic. If I believe in that and that's what we're living out, great. It's when there's that dissonance or when it's gone too far for that particular person.
Yeah, and I love the idea you talk about individualistic and collectivist cultures. And some of the clients I've worked with that come from a collectivist background, there's still some role, like roles that you can distinguish between, right? There is a parent, there's respect for this parent. And an enmeshment and a severe thing that we're talking about, or a severe level, would be where you can't even distinguish between these roles, right? And one language I hear, and just because you use this term does not mean you're enmeshed, but is, my mom's my best friend. My dad's my best friend.
Or the phrase, let me go ask my parents, even as an adult, right? Let me see what my mom says. Oh, my mom doesn't like that guy I'm dating, doesn't like that job, so I'm not going to do it. Yeah. That's when it may become problematic.
So when you and I were getting our PhDs and we were teaching as part of our doctorate, and parents would call the college for their adult child, why their grades.
Why their grades are low and how I can give them an A, how I can do the thing for their child.
You need to.
Absolutely. It was phrased a little more pointed than what I'm phrasing. But that is an example.
Yeah.
Where we don't allow our adult children to be adults, to be independent thinkers, even our teenagers, even our little kids. Yes, our little kids obviously have to come to us. We have to lead in a kind of different way. But I want my 7-year-old to be able to think for herself. I want her to be able to make mistakes or pursue the things that are fun to her and have that be okay. Enmeshment would look like she pursues those things. I tell her, oh, I don't like basketball. So then she doesn't like basketball. Or I tell her I'm disappointed about something not even related to her, and she's taking that emotion on. That's when it's problematic.
And this is heavy dependence we're talking about here with enmeshment in that dynamic. Because there's also the part where you're best friends and there's a lot of emotional reactivity when one person in the family is emotionally reactive. We all are. If it upsets one, it upsets everyone, right? To that, I mean, to the same degree that the person who's affected by whatever incident, if you will. Then there's the part of overly kind of dependence that we're fostering unconsciously a lot of times. The parents have good intentions, but often it's probably multi-generational. And it's just, well, this is just how our family works. This is just how it is. It's normal, which is fine. And I mean, that's, if they survived and that's what's happening for them and they haven't suffered any consequences, it's fine. But then when you start looking at a child who is not independent, is having difficulty being independent in school.
We're seeing that more and more in young adults right now.
Oh my goodness.
This delay in maturity, this failure to launch of, because my parents have coddled me so much, now I'm 28 years old and I don't know how to operate in the world because my mom has done my laundry for 28 years, because they've paid all my bills, because they haven't let me face scary things. And I don't feel confident in myself unless I get their permission. So I can't think for myself.
Yeah, the confidence in making decisions is a big one.
Big one.
So that's where you get the heavy dependence for that.
We see this common too, even in littles, with things like divorce or death of a spouse.
Yeah.
Where, say, mom now doesn't have husband. This is just one example, but mom doesn't have husband. So now she's what's called parentifying her child. She's having her child do what dad used to do in the home to get chores done. She might be talking about her emotions and how bad dad is and all the things on the child. That's a diffuse boundary, right? That's a boundary we shouldn't cross. Kids are not meant to be an emotional support for parents.
The parent of a parent.
Yeah. And we see that occur often in our culture, where in divorce or death of a spouse, all of a sudden the kid becomes the new spouse, so to speak.
One question I ask clients is, who's your main source of social support? Who do you rely on? Who you process stress with? And when they say my kids, or I'm like, oh, and doesn't mean it's diagnostic, but then I investigate more, I explore more. What does that look like?
Because that can impact kiddo long-term, right? Because if I know, example, I'm that kid, right? And this is not a true story, just an example. But if I'm that kid and my mom is offloading onto me, then I'm less likely to tell her when I'm upset because I don't want to upset her more. Or I'm less likely to go out for a sport or do something I want to do because I don't want to stress her out. Or every decision I make, I'm thinking about, what is her reaction? What does she want? Maybe I even consult her. And I start to lose my sense of self in an effort to protect that parent.
Yeah. And for those who are a product of that dynamic or family dynamic, you might not even realize that that's why, but feelings like depression, right? Or overly anxious, but you don't know why.
Yeah.
This
lack of confidence.
Lack of confidence. You don't know how to identify yourself. You don't feel like you have a direction in life.
Hard time making decisions.
Yeah. Any of those things, just think about, oh, is this because, you know, I grew up with an enmeshment with one of my parents or caregivers or whatever that looks like. But we might not recognize it. It's like, oh, I'm just depressed, or I'm just anxious. I'm in school and these things. Well, how much does that dynamic play? And the biggest one for me that I think, in terms of, if we're looking at, because we're always concerned with ability to function in life, society, is not being able to do anything. You said earlier, failure to launch. That is a big one. And you know, we can think about it in a way of like, oh, this child grew up in this enmeshed family and now they're having a trouble finding a career. I want to fast forward this to where they've dabbled in many careers but can't ever get settled. They're in a relationship, but their dependence and continued dependence at an adult level still is impacting their love relationship.
And they might go through many relationships because of it.
Yeah, this isn't like just, oh, failure to launch, like the movie. It's beyond just career. It's in relationships. They don't feel like they have any sense of independence. And some of these clients that when I work with them, when we start working towards finding purpose within these boundaries until we can start challenging and navigating them, their mood changes, some of the symptoms decrease. Like it just, you can see it light up. It's like night and day a lot of times.
Oh yeah. Because now I can be confident in self. Now I'm not reliant on the emotional state, the thoughts of, the permission of someone else.
And what's fascinating is because often this is unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
In relationships, if you're the partner who's head and mesh and you don't make decisions, you tend to be the dependent one in your new relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a partner who might just naturally fall into taking care of everything, controlling, and now they're getting burnt out.
Mm-hmm. We might even see that partner as controlling.
And
it creates a whole nother dynamic through that.
Well, even to make it more complex, we might unconsciously found somebody similar.
Oh yeah, we seek out what's familiar. Even if we know something is toxic, we tend to seek out what's familiar. We say that women tend to marry their dads, right? Not literally, but who your husband is likely very close to who your dad is. And we see that dynamic because it's what's familiar. It's what your personality type is going to attract because of how you grew up. And it becomes this generational pattern that goes throughout.
Yeah, and often unconscious, right?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe there's some bonding that happened earlier on of this is what's normal, this is who loved me, and this is what I need to look for.
This is how we show love.
And then you have the partner who is controlling and taking care of this person. So then the dynamics never change, but then they show up in our offices and they're saying we're burnt out or there's lack of reciprocity. And what's interesting is when you ask the person to relinquish control, not that this is any of their fault, right? We're just looking at the dynamics and what are ways that we can intervene. One is the partner who might have more control or naturally fell into this role where they're taking care of the other partner, right? They're doing everything. Having them step back and allowing the other person some leeway.
Which is good. And it can be really jarring at first for both people, disorienting of this is not how we've done it. Or if I don't have someone giving me permission or guidance or their emotional thoughts or whatever, it can feel really disorienting because that's my North Star, not myself, not my own happiness, not my own pleasure, but the feedback of those around me.
Yeah. And you start off small with logistical things. Maybe it's like taking care of things around the house or doing more with the kids. It also is emotionally, like you're talking about, because oftentimes you see them highly dependent upon their partner for emotion regulation too.
Enmeshment's a tricky one because it can be almost couched in love or in respect, right? From a biblical sense of respecting your parents or honoring your parents. If parents are couching it as, well, I'm your parent, so you should have my permission. You should consult me first. You should respect the choice I make. Enmeshment can kind of get tucked into that. Of that's how we grew up. That is what my faith says. So therefore, that's what I do. It can show up in love looks like telling each other everything all the time.
Yeah, I have clients who will say, oh, my mom and my grandma, they're so close. They talk every single day, multiple times a day. That doesn't mean they're necessarily enmeshed, but then I'm like, ooh, let's explore that. And the emotion regulation, big time. You can see that it's highly dependent, emotionally reactive. Best friends, the best friend dynamic.
But it can be tricky because it's a volatile or potentially volatile dynamic. If I am dependent on your emotions and you're dependent on mine, the second one of us twitches wrong, it can ignite a fire in that relationship. And if the whole system is enmeshed, it can ripple on through the whole system. Whereas the hope is with boundaries, okay, say I'm across from someone in my family and they're reactive. The hope is I can see the reactivity, can even have compassion for it, but I don't have to wear it as my own. Enmeshment would mean they're reactive, they're upset, therefore I should be upset, therefore I should feel guilt, therefore my lived experience is predetermined by the other person.
And or I'm responsible for their emotions because we're family. This is what we do.
Whereas with boundaries, I can observe it, I can have compassion for it, I can even feel a bit of it, but still be able to maintain my own sense of self, emotions, thoughts, whatever it might be, regardless of the other person's reactions.
And like any work in therapy, if we change what we're doing for the better to improve our health, you know, you might not find yourself wanting to be in those relationships. And I think the couples, or I feel the couples that I work with, a lot of times the enmeshment ones are the big ones. When you start moving that away, you know, you might realize that this relationship's not for you. Because your homeostasis changes. When you start changing things, it could be healthier, absolutely. But then we're getting more independent thought. But where does that independent thought lead you?
It can be very threatening for the other person too.
And this is where the heightened kind of acts unconsciously that foster dependence. You see this with a parent-child where the parent is, well, oh, no, let me take care of you. And a lot of times you see it with money. Financial dependence is a big one.
Enabling even with substance use. Mm-hmm.
Here's a credit card. I don't want you to suffer. Go get a house, go home. Like there's no
Mhm.
regulations. There's no
Mm-hmm.
boundaries on that for them, right? It's just giving you a credit card. I know that you're using, but I'm choosing to ignore it.
Right. So let's look at what it would look like for it to be a different dynamic, to be a more boundaried or healthy boundaried dynamic. If you guys have listened to our podcast at all, you know I have a soapbox about you can't make anyone feel any type of way. This goes with that, right? I can't make you feel guilty. I can't make you feel sad. You can have those emotions in reaction to something I do, but I am not responsible for your emotions, your reactions, your lived experience, and you're not responsible for mine. That is one hallmark of a more balanced boundaried relationship.
I think a good question to ask yourself is, am I independent? Or do I constantly check in with my parents to see if what I'm doing is okay? Do I constantly need feedback? Or my partner, depending. It doesn't have to be parents.
Or my kids.
Yeah.
So
oh gosh, yeah.
That's a huge one.
That's a hard one to reflect on when you're the parent and that, yeah.
But am I independent? That's a great one. Can I function by myself? Can I tolerate distress and not have someone save me?
Can I not be upset when my family or loved ones are upset? And that doesn't mean, oh, they're struggling and they're going through a hard time and you can't feel bad. We're talking matching them on the same level and
Yep.
being chaotic.
And having it almost like this, like it sweeps you away kind of feeling.
It consumes you.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, yeah, it consumes you. That's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm. Even asking yourself, are these thoughts, are these political views, religious views my own? Or do I just hold them because that's what my parents told me to?
Yeah, reflecting back on some of the narratives that were developed that elicit this dependency. I always like to look back and say, what are the things that these people in my life are doing that might keep me dependent upon them?
Mm.
And some of it comes from their fear of not wanting to have a disconnect because they never had that in their family.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'll see, like in the parent-child relationship, the child is naturally going away just for who their own temperament and things like that. You'll see the financial and kind of clawing back and trying to take care of them in every way that they can be in their life, which is great. You want to be in their life and you care about them. And it doesn't,
both and
it doesn't do well because on a very, I don't know if this is basic or not, but I think about it as if they constantly have this safety net, there's not enough anxiety to push them forward to make decisions.
We don't grow in the comfortable. We grow in the discomfort. And we want to be comfortable because that's what we as humans, animals like is comfort. And that's not where growth happens. If we're always trying to make our kids, our loved ones comfortable, not only do we lose a piece of ourselves, but they might lose a piece of themselves.
Yeah. Similar to schoolwork. If there's not a consequence, why am I doing it? Mm-hmm. With life, if I don't have a consequence and I always have the safety net there for me, and that person's always going to come, whether it's financial or emotional, I don't have to change.
There's no motivation for change.
I don't have to change.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I?
Mm-hmm.
And the thought of changing and getting out of that, again, when we work on ourselves, change is scary. This is why it's scary, because it shifts a lot of these homeostasis or baselines or what we're used to.
And I want to mention this, and we've kind of mentioned it, but keep in mind, this is different than the other extreme of so rigid boundaries that you don't feel anything, you don't change ever.
You see a lot of that with the really, this isn't the only place, but a good example would be like extreme religious households.
Where those boundaries are, or even narcissism, where they're very firm, right? We're talking about the space in between the incredibly firm and the incredibly diffuse. A space where I can hold my own and I can take in feedback. And I do ask for support. This doesn't mean you don't go without support, but I don't need someone to do it for me. I just want them to walk alongside me sometimes.
Yeah. They don't need to save you. This person isn't always saving you. You're not dependent upon them to regulate emotionally or financially or to even exist. But they are a support in a way that you can go to for reflection. They can hold space for you in a healthy way. I mean, those are what we're talking about, not the rigid boundaries, which also you see is you shouldn't feel that way. Why are you feeling those emotions? That's weak.
Or I don't have time for that.
That's weak in our family. Yeah.
And that's just as problematic. I want to be really clear, if not more problematic in some ways.
That's an episode in itself.
It sure is, because that's an entirely different, that creates coldness, that creates disconnect, judgment, a whole different suite of emotions and experiences.
Yeah. And we'll definitely have an episode on this coming up. and one of the things you see in that context is where somebody grows up where they've never been able to rely on anybody, because the boundaries are so rigid. They've had to like just force themselves to be away from that family or whatever that system is. And then they get in a relationship and they don't like being taken care of because they're extremely
independent, fiercely independent. Yeah. It's tough. So we're talking about that space in between where you can have a little bit of both. There are times which you might be more rigid. Remember, this is kind of a fluid dynamic too.
Yeah.
This isn't static. It isn't, I'm perfect all the time. Sometimes I'm going to need more support. Yeah. Sometimes I'm going to be more enmeshed or diffuse with people.
I think it's a good balance. So the rigid one, which I'm talking about, is like you're pushing your child away through the rigidness. Like that's why I look at it as an example. Sometimes not, but when you push a child away, that's when they get this, I need to take care of myself because they're not there for me. They're not. And then the other side is pulling in. They don't want you to go out on your own. So it's like this balance between how much am I allowed to be pulled in and supported and how much am I allowed to be kind of pushed out. So somewhere in between there.
And it can change by relationship. Some relationships, it might be safer to be more emotionally expressive or even diffuse. Whereas other ones, we might have to be more firm. So it's finding that balance for you within your family, within each individual person in your family, right? The relationship I might have with my dad might be different than my siblings. And that can be okay too. But remember, at the core of this is looking at, how is this impacting me? Am I okay with the level in which I operate with someone? Am I okay with the way we talk about thoughts and emotions and live our daily worlds, or am I not? That's the barometer of, am I too diffuse? Am I too rigid? Or am I sitting in a pretty spot for myself?
And of course, the solution here is the B word, boundaries, which we've talked about many times. When we think about boundaries, again, going back to the episodes we talked about on that, is just questioning, what is this? What do I want this to look like? And what are the things I need to do to take what steps do I need to take to get that there? And a lot of times those who benefited the most from poor boundaries are going to put up the biggest fight.
Oh yeah. I say that to my clients often, of the people who balk at your boundaries are the ones who benefited from you not having them. And it's true, right? If someone's not pushing that boundary, if I set that, it's going to be irrelevant to them. But the people in which I'm setting them for might have some pushback. Do I take that on, feel guilt, and thus give up my boundaries? Or do I say, actually, this is okay and safe for me, even if you're having a reaction over there?
I'm just thinking, I kind of want you to share some of the personal, as a sibling of where you've seen this dynamic. I'm curious of how other people who watch other members this, even
within my own family?
Yeah.
I am the most boundaried of my family, I would probably say.
Yeah.
And my family grew up pretty diffuse, where there was a lot of volatility, a lot of, you should wear my emotions, especially from my mom to siblings. And so for me, having boundaries, my family received it as like, I'm on a high horse, or I think I'm better than them, or my favorite line, I'm therapizing them. It's like my favorite, because I hold a boundary. And in doing so, the big risk happened. I don't really talk to many of my siblings, or if we do, it's superficial. For me, not having that diffuse space is so much safer. Safer for me, safer for my kids, and it's a happier existence for me. And it sucks that sometimes when you create change, and I've said this before, when you create change, not everyone's going to keep pace with you. Some people are going to choose change in a different way, or choose no change at all. And so there might be this loss or separation that occurs within the family.
And what I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah.
What I'm particularly curious about too is you seen like a sibling being meshed, and what were the things that you saw and can see for us to kind of, or for the listeners to kind of think about of, oh, this is what it looks like, or I've seen that.
Well, example, mom to child. If mom's upset, one of my siblings this way, or was, my mom is deceased. If mom was upset, that sibling was upset. If that sibling wanted to drink or do whatever they were doing, mom enabled that. If that sibling got violent, which they did, mom didn't get angry at all. Whereas for me, with setting some boundaries, a slight tinge of dislike for her behavior, and she would push me away. She would tell me to fuck off. She would do all the things because it was so threatening for her. And so even seeing the way they interact, some of my siblings are pretty enmeshed, where if one holds an emotion, it's like wildfire. Everyone has it. And it's interesting to watch, especially within like my clients. I see the same thing. There's the golden child, the favorite child. That enmeshment is real. And my siblings,
Yeah.
my dad had one, my mom had one, and I was neither. And probably still not.
And that's what I was thinking is
Yeah.
anecdotally, I see the one who can step back and see these dynamics and not want that for themselves often is the scapegoat,
Oh yeah.
the black sheep.
And it's real. And there's a lot of sabotaging that goes into that dynamic too. By, well, if you continue this way, I'm going to cut you off, or I'm going to bash you.
All the
Or
behaviors that elicited enmeshment on steroids.
100%.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to cut you off. I'm going to ostracize you and make you feel shame for.
That's part of the enmeshment, the guilt tripping.
Oh,
all
yeah.
the tactics to bring you back, right? And it's tough because, and I find with clients, there's this battle of, well, I still want them in my life because they're my family, they're my blood. And really having to question for yourself is, just because you put boundaries does not mean you love them. And
That you don't love them. Boundaries doesn't mean
did I say that?
that you love them.
Whoops. Freudian slip. So just because you have boundaries does not mean that you don't love them. And you have to ask yourself, what is going to happen or what's happening to me now as I keep them in to the extent that I have now? It doesn't mean you have to completely cut them off.
And it might ebb and flow. There might be times in which I can get closer.
Yeah.
Another piece that just popped in my brain to ask yourself is, what's the motivation? Am I setting this boundary to do control and to try to one up to create another dynamic? Or am I doing it truly for protection of self, for creating healthy relationships? And I think my siblings would perceive what I've done as the former, that I did it as control or being better than them. Even my degree was seen as that because it was a massive departure from how my family runs. Versus for me, it was, what's going to breed me happiness? What's going to keep my family from living the way I did?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be education. It's going to be taking space. It is going to be not engaging in the anger and the pushing and the bullshit that comes with some of that enmeshment volatility.
And I will say that this conversation is very much from the lens of an individualistic cultures that we both exist in.
Truth.
Even the thought of what makes me happy, right? That's not necessarily a thought that comes up frequent for those in a collectivist culture. So,
Truth.
this is that lens from we're able to have that, or that autonomy is respected, or individuality is
even
valued.
Yeah.
And so when you get a culture where individuality is valued, and then you have a family who's like, no individuality. Like, they're not consciously saying that, but the behaviors are like, no, we're a unit, be dependent upon me. Like, this is where you get that discomfort and a lot of distress, or dissonance, if you will. So going back to the boundaries, thinking about it for yourself culturally, what's appropriate. Maybe you have a mix and a blend of individualistic and collectivist. So just think about it and what's important to you, not just as an individual, but also from if your culture is important to you, and those values along with that, and how do they play into there.
And you can respect familial loyalty, familial relationships, and be able to advocate for yourself. It's figuring out the balance that feels, again, authentic for you.
And what you shared, and again, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's what's so tough, is because there is risk of losing those relationships. And that's why that question of, as you said, what's the function of these boundaries? Are they to sever these relationships? Most likely not, but it might happen.
Might happen because if I'm trying to operate from one way and it does not feel good to the other, they have every right to say no, thank you.
And at the same time, asking yourself, who am I with these relationships existing as the way they are now? And how is it impacting me on an emotional level, on a physical level, like your health? And how is it bleeding over to the other people that I care that are in another family subsystem? Like, if you're
my marriage, my kids.
And kids. So I think those are very more broad questions that are helpful of, okay, that's not healthy. And you may have to go to a therapist, ideally like a family therapist, that can help you tease this apart and examine this, and hopefully be culturally sensitive and not just kind of apply and be like, that's enmeshment. Well, maybe not in the context of where you're at. So those questions, I think, are very, very, very important to continue to ask yourself. This isn't just a one-time thing, because the relationships evolve. And as you put boundaries up, like say you've asked yourself that question, you put boundaries up, and then your family, they're most likely, or whoever you put the boundaries up with, be volatile
Mhm.
or separate. It might slow down a little bit and come back, and now there's a natural homeostasis and people get comfortable. And I see that a lot too. That's a
Oh, yeah.
possibility. So
And we see this dynamic stir up, I think about the ebbs and flows of life, right? In college, okay, maybe there is a little more space. And then you're getting married and have kids. Kids all of a sudden bring enmeshment back with some fury because parents want to tell you to parent. They want to see their grandchild all the time, whatever it might be. And so you might see with different life transitions, this becomes more of a problem, less of a problem.
mhm,
The key is to ride that flow and really check in with self continually.
mhm.
Is this okay for me, the way this is existing? And if not, what am I going to do about it? No one's going to protect your safety like you can protect your own.
Mhm.
So what am I going to do to make this feel healthy for me, whatever that looks like for you?
And on the other side, what are things I'm doing that might be negatively impacting the people I care about?
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard question.
Mm-hmm.
You
Am I
know,
respecting their autonomy?
yeah, and if you notice, okay, my son or child, my child or loved one, they're having these symptoms. Um, what's going on here? Like they don't have much independence around the house. They're not helping out. I see this a lot. Lack of reciprocity is a big one when I try to get into. It doesn't mean if there's a lack of reciprocity, that means there's enmeshment. But if there's enmeshment, I typically see a lack of reciprocity. And so what is that you can do to help break that pattern? Again, relinquishing control, maybe pulling back if it's a child, like in your supporting finances, maybe not calling their previous partner and asking why they broke up with them, or calling their school when they're an adult in college and saying, what are their grades, or can you
We're getting
excuse,
involved in your child's marriage.
can you excuse the absence? Oh my,
Ugh.
in the marriage. Yeah.
Oh, it happens all the time. All the time.
Yeah. What's some examples?
Oh, experienced it personally, experienced with clients. And it can be hard at first to figure out where does everyone fit in once marriage occurs, right? For us, we operate from a Christian lens, not as firm as some other people, but in our world, it's God, then spouse. That was a hard one for my mother-in-law
Mm.
to accept that it's not God, his mom, then me. It was, or even her, then God.
Oh my.
Facts. It's a hard one for families to reconcile. Other families maybe do better at this and are ready to relinquish that role, but it can be hard for families to adjust. Or respecting when parents become parents, that they are the parent of the baby and you're the grandparent or you're the aunt or whatever. You're not that baby's parent. So try to let them function, let them be independent, make mistakes, do the things, let them come to you for support when they ask for it, but also respecting that boundary too.
And typically in Western culture, it's not seen as healthy to have parents involved emotionally or even logistically in your marriage, and even having comments about that, unless you've opened the door and are going to them for support and saying, what should I do? Which isn't a whole nother can of worms when we talk about triangulation and being careful of who you talk to. But it's not normal for them to continue to make comments and insert themselves, I should say, into that relationship without being kind of welcomed. And that's where you see enmesh, trying to control your child's relationships.
And you might lose a relationship because of it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you both agree this is okay, but maybe you don't.
Oh, countless relationships with clients I've had where that's ended because the in-law was involved.
Or even a sibling-in-law or a grandparent, right? It's not always just the direct parents, but it is this insertion of self, this belief that your world must equate to my world. And it doesn't have to.
Well, if you're going to exist in this family, it needs to.
Well, this has been Relationships Inside Out, where today we talked about enmeshment, a style of diffuse boundaries. And as we go forward, we're going to talk about the opposite side of that, what firm boundaries look like. And I don't mean the balanced kind, I mean the overly firm. Rigid, there it is. As always, if anyone has any questions or topic suggestions, feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks.